Welcome to the Fine Cooking Podcast, the show for people who love to cook. I'm your host for today, Sarah Breckenridge. Here at Fine Cooking, we basically live, breathe, and of course eat all things cooking related, and we love to chat with people who share that passion. Today we're talking about cooking for comfort or self-care. Later in the program, we'll chat with Sam Seneviratne, whose latest book, The Joys of Baking, is on just that subject. But first, I'm joined here in the studio by editors Chris Hulk and Diana Andrews. And I thought I'd love to hear from you guys on what you prefer to cook or bake to get through life's difficult moments.
Well, for me personally, I have to always say pasta.
I had a feeling you'd say that.
There's something about it. Oh my gosh. And, you know, depending on what's going on in my life, I'd have to say butter and cheese is probably the easiest and the most satisfying on the level of comfort food for me. And of course, I'll always end up adding a little splash of sauce into that mixture. But boy, that really makes me feel better.
Is this what you like to eat or what you like to cook?
It's what I like to cook and eat.
Okay.
There's something about like stirring that pasta in the pot and just the expectation, that little bit of joy that I know that I'm going to have at the end of that cooking process, you know? So, yeah, the whole process to me is really quick and easy. It's usually after a stressful day, and I just want like a moment to myself. It's the best time when no one is home, which is very rare in my house these days. And I have like some time to think about things, and that's my go-to. It's almost a no-brainer, but like I'm focused on it, but I'm not. You know? Yeah. And so like to have that, to eat that at the end, but then to just experience the whole thing is to me really comforting.
Cool. How about you, Chris?
For me, it's always a baking project, you know, and it does not even necessarily something that I may even be planning to eat myself, but I find it really therapeutic to immerse myself, whether it's a simple pan of brownies or making a cake or something more complicated than that. I just find it relaxing. I understand why people don't, but for me, it's my little moment of zen, and I can get into that sensation of the feelings of, you know, how does the dough feel and how does it smell, and, you know.
So it's no one thing as long as you're using your hands, really?
I think, you know, I guess really all of my senses, you know. One of the things that I've really gotten into is making brown butter and using brown butter and things. And as we had in our feature that Nancy McDermott and Jill O'Connor did on brown butter last year, you really have to involve all of your senses while you're making that, because it's sight and it's sound and it's smell. You know, and you're really like engaged in this process. And I like that. It's nice, you know, to just put my head in a different place. So
yeah, when I realized the degree to which sound this is a little tangent, but when I realized the degree to which sound was involved in brown butter, I felt like that was like such a revelation.
Yep.
That
when the butter gets quiet, you know it's done.
You could actually, like, I always felt like I had to hover over it, you know, and everything. And then when I realized you could actually, there's that great clue.
I even think of all these little things, like if I'm frosting a cake, you know, the feeling of spinning the cake stand and pulling the spatula through, and I don't know.
It's also familiarity, you know, that's the comfort.
The comfort, exactly.
You know?
Something you've done 100 times before.
Right.
Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned cakes, because I think one of my favorite things is almost not even a cooking thing, but it's decorating cakes. I love decorating cakes, and I get way into decorating cakes for my kids' birthdays, but also for other people too. Like, you know, I love the hands-on time.
Yep.
And just making something visually beautiful.
And watching it come together.
Yeah, the process of it. Like, the thing about cake that I love, and, you know, cookies is not the same way, because the thing I love about cake that I learned in culinary school is that as you put together a layer cake, if a layer breaks, you can actually fix that. It can be okay. If you do a lousy job, you know, if they're not quite straight, you can cover that. Like, there's so many you can cover a multitude of sins.
I was just going to say, frosting fixes a multitude of sins.
Yep. And then beyond that, just the decoration. Like I remember my son had a Batman birthday party, and I did, like, the cake was like blackout chocolate frosting, and I did like little yellow quins to outline like a city skyline. And it's the night before the party, and my husband's like, "This is insane. Why are you doing this? Why are you?" I'm like, "This is so relaxing. I don't know how to explain it. It's just like, it was very precise work, but incredibly soothing in a way."
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And then, but then to your kind of, like what you were saying, I would say, like, just the most soothing, relaxing thing to cook when I'm down is scrambled eggs, because it's quick and simple, like your pasta. But also it's got that little kind of using all senses as you're watching them scramble in the pan and knowing exactly when they're ready. There's like a little puff of steam.
Yep.
At least the way I like them soft.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, that would be it.
Yeah, big return, small investment. That's really what it's about. Although, Chris, your stuff takes so much longer, but you're so diligent about baking almost every day that it's probably a no-brainer for you now.
Yeah, for me, the sometimes the biggest thing is I just run out of time to bake everything that I want to bake, because there are so many people creating such great recipes.
So many recipes,
they
so
all have
little
to
time.
be made.
Well, speaking of recipes that have to be made, let's turn to Sam. Samantha Seneviratne is a cookbook author, recipe developer, and food stylist. In fact, she was Fine Cooking's food stylist several years ago, so we get to say we knew her way back when. She's the author of The New Sugar and Spice, Gluten-Free for Good, and her most recent, The Joys of Baking. She is also the instructor of several classes on the new Food Network Kitchen app. Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah.
So I'd love to talk about The Joys of Baking a little bit first. We are all big fans of it at Fine Cooking. In fact,
thank you.
We excerpted several recipes from it back in the fall, as you know.
Yes.
And enjoyed them thoroughly in the test kitchen.
And one of those recipes ranked in the top 10 best-rated recipes that we published for 2019.
That's right.
Is that
It was
true?
the apple fig tart. Yeah. Yes.
Hey, I had no idea. Thank you.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Cool.
So, of course, the recipes are delicious and beautifully styled in this book because they come from you. But the thing that really sets it apart is the personal narrative that's woven throughout it. In the headnotes and in the chapter headers, you write about some really painful things like the death of your brother and your divorce, as well as some really beautiful moments in your life, like raising your son and moments from your own childhood. So I'm curious if it was difficult to get in the mode of writing so candidly about such personal things.
Well, the truth is I am a pretty honest person. I think maybe sometimes a little too honest. So I don't mind sharing things about my life. And the truth is, when I was writing this book, all these things were sort of happening right when my deadlines were coming in. So it was pretty much the only thing that was on my mind. And it seemed like the perfect way to sort of work through it and, work through my divorce and the birth of my son. And
so did you conceive of this book before your divorce? Like, did you start on it before?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I actually did conceive. It was I think the proposal was probably a little bit more joyful than the actual writing turned out to be, but I think we got somewhere good, finding, good and bad to work through with baking. But it's funny, it sort of just took shape as my life was unfolding, and that was the way it was.
Yeah, makes for quite a contrast in the book and like quite a bit of drama.
I know. I don't think people talk about racism and divorce when they're talking about cake that often, but right. I like to go there. I think it's important.
Do you keep a journal? Because it's not just that you're able to talk about it, but that you write about it so beautifully. And
thank you, Sarah. I don't keep a journal. I guess this is pretty much my journal. Writing all those head notes. I mean, literally every day I just sort of wrote about what I was feeling and what I was thinking and what I needed to work through for the day. So I guess this book is basically my journal for the past couple of years.
Chris had a comment before that, like, you were saying that, like, that it kind of now that you've read her book and all the head notes,
it really, for me, just gave me a new perspective on the way recipes are written and the stories behind them. And certainly people write recipes and write their head notes in first person, but yours are so personal and so intimate that it really like kind of changed my perspective on how I look at cookbooks now.
That's so
in a good
cool.
way, in a really
Thanks,
good way.
Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how other people do it. It's funny. I only know the way that I do it. And I don't know where recipes come from if not just life experiences and cravings and joys and things like that. I mean, that's what sparks my creativity. So that's how I develop recipes. I don't know what other people do. I don't know where other people get their inspiration, but that's
I
how
think
I do it.
it's really interesting because I think there's a really emotional component for many of us about cooking and baking and the way we prepare food for the people that we care about. And I think if you didn't have that emotional component there, it just becomes a little academic and sterile.
Sure. I mean, and more of a chore, right?
Yeah, I was going to say it's actually almost the opposite of academic. It's like just robotic too,
Right.
on the
Exactly.
other end.
I mean, I have to be honest, that's kind of the way that I feel about cooking sometimes, because I love to cook, obviously, but I also just feel like sometimes it's just about getting everybody fed
Means
and
to an
getting
end.
everybody. Yeah, exactly. And it's that part becomes a chore, but that's a wonderful thing about sweets is that it's just for pleasure. It's just for joy.
Right.
It's such a treat to be able to do that for a living. I feel very lucky.
When you first conceived of this book and what it turned out to be, like to you, now that you have some time and some, it's time to have thought about it. What's the difference between the two, then and now? Like how it started out to be in your head and what it turned out to be.
It started out, I mean, when I wrote the proposal, it really was going to be the same, I had the same sort of breakdown for all the chapters, all courage, bliss, joy, all those things. But it was going to be more, broader stories from my life and from what I observe in the world. It turned out to be more of a record of the, first 2 years of my son's life and my life going through that. So it turned out to be more of a specific point, a specific period, as opposed to a broader story. But I'm okay with that. I hope people enjoy reading it. But it's funny because it's really, even when I read it now and I remember writing some of the things and I was, pretty sad or going through a hard time, and I don't really feel that way anymore. And it feels like a very specific point in my life, which I'm kind of glad to have a record of. I just hope people like to read it.
Did you feel that the essays and head notes, did they write themselves, or did you feel like did you go through a lot of drafts on them?
Oh, well, I mean, I don't know about other people, but I find writing excruciating. I find it to be so difficult. I don't find writing easy. And I don't know who does, but I have to go through drafts after drafts after drafts. Oh my God, so many. And so many people read my drafts, and I love to get feedback. So I find writing to be a real slog, if I'm being very honest. Cooking, on the other hand, it's such a joy to get into the kitchen and just mess around. But the writing part, I'm glad I do it because I'm glad to have it in the end. But, oh boy, it's hard.
So how does it feel that this book has been met with such a warm embrace and such acclaim?
Oh, I'm so relieved. It's very personal. So when I first put it out in the world, you never know what people are going to say. And people can be mean, unfortunately,
yes, they can.
in the world. I always wonder why, people forget that all the things that we put out into the world is just generated by some human being doing their best, to provide, fun things for people to read and bake and cook. And sometimes you wonder why people are so angry about it. But anyway, all that to say, I am nothing but grateful and pleased that people have been reading it and enjoying it and baking from it. It feels magical to see when people actually cook from your book. It will never get old to me. When I did that event with you, Chris, in Bethel, I was beyond touched. I mean, I could have cried 50 times just to think that people are actually paying attention to what I'm writing and cooking something for their families. There's nothing like that feeling. It's so joyful.
I feel like we're in a really interesting time now where I think, especially for you as a cookbook writer, where you now can see what people are doing.
Right.
They can tag you on social media.
I know.
And, you get this immediate feedback of, hey, I made these delicious gingerbread mascarpone bars, and look at them. They're amazing, and they smell great. And
you're no longer sending it into a void.
Yeah. You're not operating in this vacuum where you don't know if people are actually using your book.
Yeah, it's magic. It's really, I have pretty positive things to say about it. I mean, I love it when people tag recipes that they've made of mine. Every time it makes me feel very proud and very, very grateful. I love it so much.
So Chris mentioned the ginger mascarpone bars, which thanks to his baking mania, we are enjoying right now.
Yeah.
He brought them in, and they are fabulous. And I have to say, this actually was one of my favorite recipes, just speaking about the head note, because you talk about baking these while you were sleep training your son. And you turned to baking these bars to keep your mind busy. I could totally relate to that, because I think that was probably one of the most emotionally harrowing nights of my life.
It's crazy, right?
I wish I'd thought to bake instead of just staring at the clock and the monitor.
I know, because when you stare at the clock, every minute feels like 30 minutes.
Right. It was like
that they're crying.
Okay,
so,
do we go in there?
Yeah,
do
you
we give up?
busy.
Do we go in?
Oh my God, it's so stressful, but this recipe doesn't use a mixer, which I was like, oh, this is perfect. I can just quietly beat something together and not think about my screaming child for a minute.
So the book is not all about baking through painful moments, as you said.
No.
And I guess originally you intended to have many more joyful or just observational moments, and it is it's lovely how there is a huge range. You also write a lot about things that you make for friends, or things that remind you of moments with your son Artie. So would you say there's a difference in what you bake through painful moments versus joyful ones?
Oh, what a good question. Not in the final. I think that's a really good question. Let me think about that for a second. I think probably through painful moments, I like to do more complicated projects, like croissants or just dough where you can really get into it a little bit. Happier moments are for things like scones that you can sort of throw together and then enjoy whatever's happening in your life. But that's how I feel. I prefer to sort of bury my head a little bit into a more complicated baking project when things are a little bit hard. That's probably the procrastinating vibe, just get me away from the trouble. So
it's also,
put my head in dough.
More complicated. It's just a way for you to kind of step back from whatever is bothering you and focus on a project.
It's all therapeutic, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very there's something very meditative about it. I know when you meditate, you're supposed to clear your mind. But for me, when I bake, it's sort of just focusing on these super simple tasks that you break down. And then, you know exactly what's going to happen. And there's something sort of meditative about it as well. Just being very, very present.
There's also all these feelings and sounds that you become accustomed to, like the sound of the sugar creaming into the butter and the feeling of cracking the egg open. And
I'm so with you, Chris. Thank you for mentioning that. The sound of creaming butter is my favorite. That scrapey, thick, fatty, scrapey sound. Oh, and the sound of chopping nuts. I could sleep to the sound of chopping walnuts. I love that sound so much. There's so many good ones.
Chopping nuts so annoying.
Do you use a serrated knife?
I guess I'm not a true baker.
You gotta use a serrated knife. It'll change your life. An offset serrated knife.
Oh wow! I don't think I don't own an offset serrated knife.
I'm gonna get you one, Sarah. It's gonna change your life. It's gonna change your life.
Like I've even thought about buying one of those silly little nut grinder things because I hate chopping those so much.
No, because then you can't hear it.
Yeah.
You gotta get it's like the offset ones. They're cheap. They're nothing fancy, but there's something about it that makes chopping nuts and chocolate a lot easier.
Oh.
That's really interesting.
I got lots of little stupid facts for you.
Those are good, though. Those are good facts.
Those are good tips.
Yeah. So what's your favorite recipe in the book? Or maybe it's easier to ask what Artie's favorite recipe in the book is.
What's Artie's?
Because I know he was probably a taster for you, right?
Yeah, he'd be, well, I really tried not to give him, I don't really know why, but I tried not to give him sugar for the first year of his life. I just had this weird arbitrary rule in my head. So he did not taste a lot of things at first, but I think, you know what? I think my favorite recipe is the Amaro stracciatella ice cream, which is not even a baked good, but I love Amaro so much. And in ice cream, it's sort of like when you use bourbon or like really strong vanilla in an ice cream, it sort of just adds a little essence, a little background herbal essence that is so delicious with the chocolate. So I think that might be today. That's my favorite recipe.
Ask you again tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. It's like your children. You can't pick. But
Another one that I loved, especially with the head note, is the rhubarb strawberry cake, because you write a little essay on how rhubarb is not really as beautiful as it seems in pictures, which is like a pet peeve of mine, that I see these beautiful, magazine or cookbook photos of rhubarb cake, and it, never turns out like it looks.
I mean, I'm a food stylist. I do it for a living, right? And I can somehow never make rhubarb look as it always looks like brown mush, sludge, right?
And that's the other thing about this head note was like, I love that this is a food stylist saying this, right? And that you also kind of turn it into an analogy for Instagram in general, that it's like all this perfection that is not the same as real life. And
it's not the same. And also it doesn't even matter. Like, I suppose you could spend a million hours trying to make your rhubarb look perfect on top of your cake, but who cares, right? I mean, you just want it to taste good in the end, and
which
it
always does, yeah.
Yeah, so, sometimes you got to give it up.
So the title obviously harkens to the Joy of Cooking, which we actually just had the authors of the new revised Joy of Cooking on our podcast a couple weeks ago. So that's
awesome.
They were fantastic.
Yeah.
What a project.
So you talk a little bit in your intro about what you see as the relationship, like why you chose the name and everything. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's funny because I found some early editions of the Joy of Cooking by Irma Rambar in a little bookstore in New York, and I was reading her introductions, and it really struck me that she specifically addressed not wanting to add feelings to her cookbooks. But then I thought, well, then why are you calling
it joy?
The joy, like you're talking about a feeling, and sort of that discrepancy sort of interested me initially, and that's sort of how we got the idea. And then, but she does put feeling in there. Like, it's so cute the way. I'm sorry, cute is sort of a diminutive word. I don't mean it like condescending, but it's just wonderful. She's so smart and clever the way she initially made little jokes and like put her feelings into the recipes. I mentioned a couple examples in the introduction, like pot au feu being a palatable dish. It's just like, or I can't remember.
Icebox
She's just so
soup, I think.
An icebox soup.
Right.
I don't remember. Or the tongue being a palatable dish. She's just so funny. And I just thought it was so cool that the project was sort of born out of some of her own personal tragedy initially. So all of that together sort of inspired me, and I wanted to do, it's everybody asked me why I named the book Joy, because it seems like such a common title, but it's really an homage to the original. I mean, I'm paying my respects and then trying to add something to it.
I think it's a nice reminder too that there is joy in preparing food and feeding people. And I think it's sad that we live in a world where there's so much marketing that has presented a message and pressed a message that cooking is tiresome and awful work, and that the only way to really have it be manageable and acceptable is to use shortcuts and prepared foods. And I just don't think that's the case. And I really hate the fact that there's a message that this really wonderful activity is unpleasant.
That's written by people who really don't like to cook. I mean, as hard as it is, I think, for us to understand that why are things written like this? I think there really are people, a handful in the world that are infiltrating thoughts that really do not like to cook.
I mean, I get it. As we were saying earlier, like when you have to do it every day for family, for kids, it gets to be drudge. And that's when you need something to you need to step back and sort of reclaim the joy.
I have to say, me personally, I mean, you've seen me in the test kitchen, Sam. I mean, I'm cooking all day, multiple recipes. I still go home and cook because that's my That's my moment where I'm thinking about what do I want to eat? Because honestly, after being in the test kitchen all day and all that food is coming out all day long, the last thing I want is something that we're preparing. Sometimes we've got 3, 4 testers working, multiple recipes. And the last thing I want to do is take that home and eat it. So when I get home, it's like my personal.
I think the other thing, too, is I think it's okay to say, you don't have to want to do this every day, but you can go home and make a scrambled egg one day or have a peanut butter and jelly. And this is great.
I do that all the time.
Yeah.
I do that all the time. A piece of toast, just because I'm too lazy. But then
to open the peanut butter.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm too tired to open the peanut butter.
So your latest project is the Food Network Kitchen app. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's so cool. It basically, we are doing these classes on the app, and you can really follow along because all the information is, all the measurements and everything. We give you all that information so you can really just follow along and cook with us on your app. It's very cool, and it's really fun to make them. I haven't done any live classes yet, but I hopefully will be doing some soon. Those are even better because you can cook with your favorite Food Network people and ask them questions in real time. So it's a pretty cool app. The videos that I've been doing are just still, but we basically put in moments for you to pause the app so you can, finish baking something and then come back and meet me. And there's the technology now is so fun. We can basically just cook along with everybody. It's so cool.
That's great. Did you choose your topics or your recipes? Were they?
I don't get to choose, unfortunately, but for the most part, they give me sweets, which is obviously my favorite thing to do. Every once in a while, I have to do something savory, but I don't mind.
Cool. So what do you do when you see, let's say they give you a recipe that's a sweet and you say, oh, I would have done this differently. How do you get over that feeling of, oh boy, how do you masquerade that and make it seem like it's okay? Because I know you must come across
that.
It happens
all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the truth is, all those recipes, if they're not my own recipes, they come from the Food Network Test Kitchen. They've been tested. They've been vetted. They come from a whole line of very qualified professionals. So they come in good shape. Occasionally there's something I would do differently. And since I'm the one on camera doing it, if I just talk to the culinary producer, usually we can negotiate something and come up with a plan. But obviously all the recipes are created by the Food Network Kitchen, and they're great to begin with. So it's not usually a problem, but sometimes I get to change things at the last minute.
So are there any other projects on the horizon that you want to tell us about?
What can I tell you about? I don't know what's secret and what's not secret. I'm hoping to be doing more video in the future. That's really the thing I'm having the most fun doing. I might take a little break from books for a moment. And the truth is that, it's funny, I work a lot by myself. I work a lot by myself in my house. And while that is wonderful because I can spend time with my son and I'm a homebody, I like to be at home, it's also really important, I think, to work with other people. And get ideas and collaborate and learn new ways of doing things. I really miss working with other people and learning, because I've always found that when you work in a test kitchen or with a team of people, you get new ideas and you find new ways of doing things and new ways of cooking things and the whole thing. So what I'd really like to do in the near future is more team stuff, work with more groups and more kitchens and things like that, and hopefully do a lot more video, because that's sort of fun these days. I'm having fun doing that. We'll see.
And we'll keep coming up with story ideas for you too. So
please do. Yes. I'm excited. I want to keep. Chris and I have a good one that we're working on. So stay tuned.
I'm like super psyched. I can't wait.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on our podcast, Sam. It's great talking to you.
It's been really fun. Thank you for having me.
You can follow Sam on Instagram at Samantha Seneviratne, and we'll look forward to your next project. Talk to you later.
Thanks, Sam. It was great talking to you.
Bye.
Bye.
You too.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to Fine Cooking Magazine. You can visit us at our website, finecooking.com, and follow us on Pinterest, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, where you can also join our Facebook group.